Yeah, so that brings us to our panel. And I'll turn it over to our moderator, Jimmy McLaughlin, who is a longtime activist in the LGBT community here in Houston, as well as a very longtime member of the free thought community here. So, I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself and introduce the panelists.
I love having a microphone. I want to start singing. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the guy in the bar that you sit next to him, won't let you go because he talks your head off. I'm not done thing. I have all my life explored the idea of what people think and what they believe. And what I thought we'd do tonight to explore our panelists and what they believe, we're going to give everybody a chance to tell their story. We're going to introduce them and let them tell, how they're viewing life, what their goals are, what their aspirations are, and what their project they may be working on. But let me start with me, and because I like to start with me, and tell you my story because, I'll be fast, but it's sort of a story of a guy from a very small town in Appalachia. Is it on? Appalachia. I lived in a valley, we call it a holler, and it was the 60s. I led a very sheltered life, a wonderful family. I went to grade school through high school with the same 112 people. We had no one who was different. We had no one who was Jewish or African American. I never met an African American until I was 18 and went away to college. I'm so sorry. What can I say? I've made up for it since then. But I'm telling you, living in this vacuum and watching the world on TV, it was the 60s, the Vietnam War. People were protesting. People were. Archie Bunker was on TV, and I had to watch the world from a distance, and doing that, it threw me into reading and just a insatiable appetite to learn about why people are acting like that when my world seems so perfect. So. Things move on. I get to about 12, and I'm kind of sort of figuring out I'm gay. And at the same time, I knew that in my small town that there was a gay guy, and if you wanted to insult someone, you used his name. And I knew that someday I would have to leave my Green Valley because I didn't want to be the town queer. But I still had a way to go. I'm only 12. So as part of this process, I start kind of questioning everything, and an event happened. All my friends get invited over to these new people's house, and they offer me cookies, and I can't turn down a cookie. But they went into the dining room, and they all started preaching, and all my friends were there, all the friends that I know, and I only went as far as the living room because I didn't quite trust who those people were. Do you know those 10 feet have stayed with me for the rest of my life? I sit there, I ate the cookie, but I sit there and I listened to how they were manipulating my friends and telling they'd go to hell if they didn't do this and the glories of the afterlife. And it was, to me, at 12, was an absolute medicine show. And from then on, I viewed life very skeptically, and I read more and more, trying to understand. Coming out to process a very upsetting episode is when I finally went away to college, and I made a point to join everything and meet as many people as I possibly could. I came back, and my very best friend of all those years, who was gay, and the preacher preached from the pulpit because someone caught the preacher in the dirty bookstore in the big town far away. His reactive strike was to pick out my friend, point at the front row of the church, the big church everybody went to, and went on about the horrors of homosexuality. So his family jumped in, various people. Everyone was nice. No one wanted my friend to wish him ill, but they wanted to get him back to Jesus. He had to get rid of this horrible sin. He could not be himself. He must come over and find Jesus. He got married to a wonderful woman. He had a child. The whole thing lasted about 3 years. He says, he calls me, says, I can't take it, come on down. I said, I'll bought some sheets, I'll clean the apartment, just come on down to the big city and you can be who you want to be. He didn't make it. He hung himself with his bathrobe. So at that moment, I knew that I could not go back, no matter how pleasant my Green Valley was, that I had to go out and I had to go on a journey. And I want you all to take that journey with me, to understand all the stuff that I've seen, all the stuff that I've read. Why did they kill 6 million Jews? Why did the Pulse nightclub happen? Why are people, in the name of so many different versions of a religion, striking out at other people at the same time they're talking about how their religion is based on love? So many years, a lot of it in a disco hall. I certainly understand the place, the sanctuary that a gay bar is. And over the course of time, I became that person that won't shut up. And, everyone has a grandfather or an uncle at Christmas who, says all this stuff, and ignore him, that's your crazy uncle. I am destined to be the crazy uncle because I look at everything. I look at everything as exactly the way it is. And if you want to prove to me, and I want to know, I have an inquiring mind, but I'm seeing it logically, and unless you can prove to me without using words, well, I believe that's true, or God said in Corinthians, whatever, unless you can actually prove to me, I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to base myself on science and reason, and I'm going to find out what I could do to make people believe or understand the actions of their religion has placed on people who don't believe it. So that's one of the things that brings me here, and I hope it brought you here too, because we have a panel tonight who have very different versions of, they've grown up all different, I'm sure, than me. I can't wait to find out. But all of us do have something in and that is we want to be what my friend wanted to be. He wanted to be himself. And you're not hurting anybody else if you want to be yourself, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. And there should be no reason why you can't be all you can be. If everybody understood the difference, they wouldn't fear it, because when they fear it, they go and they kill. So, having said that, I think we'll just be random if y'all don't care. I could go down the line first, though. Let me just give you an idea who's here. This is Brenda Lunger. Welcome. You know Ray Hill, who's taking a little break back there, stretching his legs. Leg. I'm sorry. I could tell. Okay, and we have Noelle George. We have Michelle-Paulette Blanche Backes. I like that name. And Brandon Mack. Okay, who wants to go first? You want to go first? Okay. All right. Tell us about yourself.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Brenda Lunger. Many of you know me here. I've been a member of Humanists of Houston for a while. I will try to be real quick with this. My background is a very fundamentalist Christian background. My parents thought the Southern Baptists were liberals. I was raised, my parents were both in full-time Christian work from the time I was 6 and until they retired. They were both involved in Christian education. That was about the time when Christian schools really took off, and it kind of coincided with the time when desegregation was really taking off. And so, there was always that part of it where, I was raised in the church. I've been a deacon. I've been a moderator, in other words, leading the elder board in the church and all that. But there were many things that didn't fit. First of all, I have degrees in physics and chemical engineering, and so from the science side, the religion didn't fit. I'm trans. I was born with a body that didn't put me into the right places where I needed to be. I saw myself as female, and I was always put in the line for the boys' room. I was always playing boys sports. I was all of this, and just nothing matched. And many trans people will tell you, you find out about trans usually before you find out about gay. Because gay really doesn't kick in until puberty, and you really start noticing and all that, other people, and being attracted to them. To me, I knew that something was wrong at the age of like 3 or 4. So there was that didn't fit. And so with all of these things, I reached a point in my life, actually in my early 40s, where the lack of fit was destroying my life. When I was 40, we divorced. I have 3 children. They live back in Tennessee with the ex, who is a professor at a Pentecostal university. But both of my daughters are atheist, by the way. And my son really doesn't believe it either. But so all of this in my life that I've been going through, and also I've had a very nice career. I wouldn't call it rising to the top of the company, because that's not what I wanted to do. But that leads me to where I'm at today. Very happy in my skin. Very comfortable in front of people, when before I was always a little bit, are they going to notice something wrong with me? No, that's gone now. But my major field of activism right now, and I tend more toward advocacy than activism because of the area where I'm at, is within the corporate realm. I have spoken at Out and Equal, which is the largest corporate and workforce LGBT organization in the world. I've spoken at, actually just a week ago Thursday, I was up in Dallas speaking to the headquarters of Southwest Airlines. Southwest had a joint pride event with the company that I work for, which is Accenture, I can say that now. And it was an awesome session. They wanted somebody there who could teach about what we're calling gender authenticity. In other words, be yourself. Find out who you are and be yourself. And so basically, I educate in gender authenticity in the corporate setting. In this case, the CEO of Southwest Airlines was sitting in the front row learning about what it means to allow your employees to be yourselves, because when people bring their whole self to work, they're better. They perform better. And they serve the customer better. And so that is where my activism lies right now for the most part. But if you have any questions about that, come up to me later. And I really appreciate Humanists of Houston for the wonderful growing role that you all have in supporting the LGBT community.
They're going to try to work me in here. My name is Raymond Hill. That's how I was born, the son of Raymond Hill, different middle name, so I'm not a junior, who was a skeptic. The Hills had been skeptics for generations going back to England. And my mother was Mary Frankie Taylor Hill, who was an atheist. Her father was a physician and an atheist in East Texas around the turn of the 20th century, and he got away with that because he was, after all, the physician. So with that auspicious beginning, my first career was as a teenage fundamentalist Baptist evangelist. I don't think my parents approved, but Frankie gave me the best advice I've ever received in my life. She said, if you really want to do this, go ahead. But if you think you're about to embarrass yourself, come home. Well, at 13 years old, I hit the road having memorized Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I'm going to be an actor. Memory is not a problem with me. And so I memorized the gospel so I could teach Sunday school, and the preachers thought that was a calling. I didn't know what that meant, but when they said travel and money, it meant enough. And so I did that. I was a true believer. I believed that what I was saying was in fact the things that should be said. And I accepted the Great Commission as a personal responsibility. And I did that until I was 17 years old. And then I had a Pentecostal event at my Baptist revival in Colemanile, Texas, and that shook my faith, and it has not since been restored. I came out of the closet, well, I stopped preaching when I was 17. I came out of the closet when I was 18. I stopped drinking when I was 19. So most of the exciting parts of my life are compressed in that area. When I came out in 1958 at the age of 17 at Galena Park High School. Now see, that image just popped in their minds. They thought, Pasadena, Galena Park? Yes, I was openly gay at Galena Park High School as a senior, but I was also the quarterback of a team that beat Pasadena and the captain of the football team, so they either didn't know what that meant or they were afraid to make fun of me. I used to get into fights because they made fun of the guys that I dated. And I held my ground. About 1966, a friend of mine at the University of Houston called me. He was a handsome young man. I've been eyeing him for some time. And he went to the basement men's room at the M.D. Anderson Library, and the cops grabbed him. They got his student ID, but he was able to escape. He made it home. He called me from home saying, I've been busted, what do I do? And while I have him on the telephone trying to brainstorm my way through what would have been a felony charge at the time for which he could have gone to prison, he said, wait a minute, I hear somebody in the driveway, and when the squad car pulled up, he blew his brains out. I heard the report of a pistol, and then I had not a Baptist evangelist, but a different mission in my life. Initially, I wanted to go to work at decriminalizing homosexual activity. We had an old sodomy law. It provided for felony punishment. It applied equally to homosexuals and heterosexuals for given acts. And so I went to work to get rid of that law. I was a little bit detoured because in 1970 I went to prison. I had been a burglar. I stole things queers know about: antiques, art, jewels, electronics. It's a good profession, but the retirement system sucks. And so I went to prison, and I was in prison in 1973 in correspondence with Senator Barbara Jordan, Representative Mickey Leland, Representative Braun Waters and his assistant, Deborah Danberg, and Representative, see how quickly you forget their names when they get indicted, the Hispanic representative from East Houston who went to prison for that. But at any rate, we were working together to change the law, and we did. So on September the 1st, the warden called me. I was in my office, in the maintenance office, and he said, "Oh, Hill, you care about that queer shit, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, big boss, I sure do." "Well, the law's changed." I said, "Yes, sir, I've kept up with it in the legislature, and the warden just pardoned 5 boys." No one was under 60. He called them boys. "That I'm gonna put on the chain tomorrow and get off, and I thought you might want to go down and wish him a fare thee well." I said, "Thank you, warden, I'll take off a little early." He said, "Oh, no, I thought about that. I told that commissary lady to give you anything you wanted and I'd pay for it." So one of the first duties of my activism in 1973 was to go pick up some commissary that the warden had paid for, go down to the pump wing, that's where the gay people live. I lived in the construction and the maintenance wing. Go down and have a party on their last night in prison. Here's the story. I knew about one of them because he had appealed his case. And I knew of Alvin Buchanan's cases because I had read them in the Southwest Reporter. I knew him and we talked. I didn't know him until that night, but I knew his cases, and we talked about his cases from Dallas and his appeals. Two of the other guys, an Hispanic and a white couple, that were treated like a couple in prison. They sailed together at the third tier in cell. Nobody had any business going back there except to count the convicts. And they had maximum privacy, and one of them worked in the kitchen, the other one worked in the laundry. And they lived in prison much as they'd lived in the free world. Well, they had been convicted 3 times for committing sodomy, and therefore they got life sentences, and they were there, and they were going to get out the next day. The other 2. That's not why we're down here. We don't know anything. We're glad to get out, but that's not the charge we're doing time on. Even on the occasion of the end of a life prison sentence, they could not admit being gay. Let that soak in. That is the influence, whether we are believers or not believers, that religion has placed on our culture. Like a sealable bag. There's no escaping it. Even if you're not a believer, your culture is so insidious with it that it affects how you think not only about others, but about yourselves. So, well, I worked my way out of prison with a pencil, and even though I was sentenced to 160 years, I made it to the street in less than 5. And everything that's going on in Houston, I co-founded. Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, Montrose Activities Center, Montrose Counseling Center, which is now just Montrose Center, Montrose Clinic, which is now Legacy Healthcare, Gay Pride. I am the co-founder and wrote the bylaws for all of those organizations and struggled with my transgendered friend to turn their feelings into political activism. If you see a copy of Outsmart magazine, there's an article in there about Judge Phyllis Fry, a real pioneer with whom I stood from the first day she began her transition. And so in less than 50 years, we have come from a group of people that hid, felt guilty, could not think of anything positive about ourselves, to folks you really don't want to mess with. Okay? What happened in Orlando, and by the way, the gay and lesbian, well actually lesbian leadership of Orlando had me on the phone while the man was still in the building shooting. She thought in our first conversation there were about 20 victims. And she wanted to know, how do we deal effectively with the media in a tragedy? The night I spent in the cell block with those old men, there was a bar in New Orleans called the Upstairs Lounge. Someone firebombed it, and it went up in flames. Every inch of progress we have made has cost dearly. You want the progress, but you're not sure you want to pay the price. If you have time this evening, I'm going to be on the stage at the Alley Theater, and they're going to show a clip of a new documentary of some of my early work. It's free. All you have to worry about is parking, and of course when it's downtown, that's not the most pleasant thought. But what they're going to do is roll out this film, and then they're going to throw me on the stage and let the audience gnaw on me for about an hour. You'll get out of there, it's still daylight, so you don't have to worry about driving through downtown in the dark. I hope you will come, because until we know one another. By the way, I went to an Interfaith Alliance news conference, and I met my first mufti. I always thought that was kind of a fictional title. but there are really muftis, nice guys, good looking. I always notice, young. And he's enthusiastic about building a bridge between the Muslim ministry and the LGBT community. Every inch of progress costs dearly. And two groups that are permanently bound as a result of earlier this week in Orlando, and that's the Hispanic community and the gay community. LGBT people got killed in that, and some of them were not out of the closets to their families. What a hell of a way for your mother to learn who you really are. Any of you mothers are sitting out there, and by the way, all your fathers, happy Father's Day tomorrow. Think about what you think about your children and what you think you know about your children and what you learn about your children. My niece called, only have one, and she said, the largest of my twin sons has just come out of the closet to me. Well, I wasn't expecting him. But I had nothing to do with that. It's not genetic. It is incidental. We all have all kinds of genes, some of which we call, and don't ask me to decorate or get the fashion gene. It ain't coming. But whenever it comes around, what can we do? We can hug. We can extend our hand of support. And don't ever forget to remind everybody you know they are valued.
Hi everybody, I'm Noelle George, and I'm the Executive Director of Foundation Beyond Belief. Some of you may know that because I was here in front of you in February, and again for a brief time, I believe in April, talking about what we do. But today, instead of talking about what I do professionally, I'm going to talk about who I am personally. I think when I was here before, I told my coming out of the religious closet story, but I'm going to recap that quickly for you. I was about 13, and I wasn't raised with any religion, but when I was about 13, I was at school, and this girl said something about Jesus. And I thought he was her pen pal in another state or something. I had never heard of Jesus. And so I said, "Who's Jesus?" And she was very shocked, and she was very upset, and she said, "Of course you have to know Jesus. You're going to go to hell if you don't know Jesus." And that all sounded very concerning to me. So I went home to my parents and I said, we need to know Jesus. And so their response to that was to take us to a Methodist church. And so I went to the Methodist church from the time I was about 13 through my teenage years, and got baptized and confirmed and everything. And was really into it. I went to church camp. I met my first boyfriend at a church dance. And then when I was about 19, I met two girls, and they were lesbians. And I had never been around lesbians before. And I was very intrigued, and through knowing them and dating one of them, I realized that I was bisexual at 19. And this was right after Ellen came out. I think Ellen came out in 95, somewhere around that time. So this was right around the time that Ellen came out. So it was, just to give you a context of the timing, it was still very, shocking. And I came out to my parents, and my mother was very upset. She was worried about discrimination, but she also was very upset because she, quote, wanted grandchildren and me to get married, and that would never happen. So because I thought I was dating a girl, so I thought maybe I was a lesbian at the time. So she was very upset by that. My dad was pretty cool with everything. He was just kind of like, whatever. And so, eventually I decided that I was bisexual, and so I lived most of my life to this point thinking that I was bisexual. And then I got married. I had dated a few women here and there, but not many women. And I got married to a man and had a 2-year-old, had a child. And when she was 2 years old, we were living in another country. We were living in South Korea. And while I was very isolated over there, I had a lot of time to think. And while we were over there, I realized that I might be a lesbian. And so I cried in the shower for an hour and tried to come to terms with what did it mean that I was a lesbian and married to a man. And so I decided, first of all, that I would have to separate my feelings about my sexuality with my feelings, and my what I was going to do about my marriage, because I couldn't tackle both of them at the same time. So I basically said, okay, I'm going to figure out whether I'm a lesbian or not, and then we'll go from there. That doesn't have to say anything about whether I'm married or not. So being a chemical engineer, and being in South Korea where there's not a lot of diversity, and being in a marriage where I couldn't experiment sexually, I decided to do some other types of experiments. So one thing that I did was I went online to an online group, and I read through all the threads there, and I tried to learn more about sexuality and what sexuality is. And I learned there that there are 3 components to sexuality. There's physical attraction, not sexuality, but to attraction, which kind of determines sexuality. So there's physical attraction, sexual attraction, and emotional attraction. So a lot of people determine their sexuality through sexual attraction, who they're sexually attracted to. But what if you're asexual, which means that you don't really have sexual attractions or have interest in sex? Or what if you're demisexual, which means that you don't really have sexual feelings about someone until you really get to know them? Then how do you determine your attractions? So the first thing that I did was I tried to figure out who I was physically attracted to. And physical attraction is like when you're looking at someone and you think whether they have a pleasing appearance or not. So what I did, being in Korea, since I was unable to really get a lot of diversity on the street, was that I looked at pictures of Western celebrities, and I looked at 15 pictures of men and 15 pictures of women, and then I tried to see how many of them I found physically attractive. So when I looked at the men, it was about 3 of them, and when I looked at the women, it was about 12 of them. And so I was like, okay, well that there's definitely a slight favoring on one side there. And then I thought about what physical characteristics I liked in men and what physical characteristics I liked in women. And with men, I'm very particular. Maybe I like long hair or them to be bald or, something else. But with women, it's pretty much legs, butts, boobs, I'm not too picky. So that told me something. And then I went on to figure out that I was demisexual, which again means that you don't have sexual attractions until you really get to know someone. So that made my figuring things out a lot more complicated. And so I looked at emotional attraction and went back through my past and thought about when I had dated men or when I had dated women, who was I more emotionally attracted to? And by and large, it's women. So I struggled for a while with choosing a label, because I definitely favor women, but I have had attractions to men. So I have settled on a Kinsey 5, which is, if you're familiar with the Kinsey scale, it means that you're mostly lesbian, but you have incidental attractions to men. Now, lesbian didn't really feel like the right term either, because I'm still married to my husband, and decided later, and I don't want to take up too much time, but there's much more to my story, but I decided later that I wouldn't leave him. And so lesbian felt a little off as well, so I eventually settled on queer. So I consider myself a queer person in a hetero marriage, and a demisexual. And so my journey has been complicated and interesting as usual, I think, when it comes to these types of things, when you're not within the norm, because there's not a lot of role models, there's not a lot of examples out there for how this journey is when you're outside the norm. And I just wanted to mention that I wrote a little thing about my story, and it's going to be published on the Atheist Manifesto blog starting next week in installments, because it's quite long, under a pseudonym, because I have my husband's family is religious and I'm not out to them. So I realize that this is being videoed, and that's fine, but I don't want them to be able to search my name and be able to read a blog about my personal story. So if you're interested in learning more about my story, feel free to ask questions or check out that blog, the Atheist Manifesto.
And we are going to let everybody ask questions here shortly once we get through the panel.
All right, everyone still with us? I want to make sure. So my name is Brandon Mack, and my story can be quite long, so definitely hold me to my time, because I just want to mention one very important thing. This year, I turned 33. And in 33 years of life, I have been through quite a bit. I am now a 3-time cancer survivor, now having gone through thyroid cancer. I am a rape survivor, and I am a survivor of life. And what I mean by that is that being someone who is Black, same gender loving / gay, and also a member of the Humanist community, my life has been a life of coming out in a lot of different stages. So just follow me with this. First off, I would say that I came out as Black. I know it's hard to believe that you have to come out as Black, but for me, I had to, because I grew up in a very small town, Lake Jackson, Texas, which is 50 miles south of here, and Lake Jackson is predominantly white. So in growing up, I was predominantly the only Black kid in my classes, and because of that, a lot of people assumed, because of how I talk, how I act, that I was an Oreo, for lack of a better phrase, meaning Black on the outside and white on the inside. So growing up, I would always have to remind people that I am Black. And this would be even reminding my own Black community in Lake Jackson that I was Black. In Lake Jackson, because the population is so small, the number one place where you would find other Black people would be the church. And I grew up in a Black Baptist church, very, very conservative, very anti-LGBT, and I got bullied in that church setting all the time. I would be bullied for being intelligent. I would be bullied for speaking the way that I speak. And I would be bullied because I was coming across as being someone who they could easily identify as being gay, even though I didn't realize that. And that was just because of me just being me. I think that I realized that I was gay when I was 6. And primarily thankful due to it being the mid-80s, HBO was in the house, thankfully. And it was my first time of ever seeing 2 men kiss on TV, and I connected with that. And I realized at that age of 6 that I started questioning things, because literally I saw this image and I looked to myself and I thought to myself, that's okay. There's something right about that. My parents saw that I saw this image, and they quickly started to correct me and tell me that that was wrong, that that was against God, that was against everything, and that I could not be that. And that Black people are not that. So here I am early in my life trying to figure out my race, for one, now my sexuality for another, and as well as my connection to this thing known as religion. Because basically when I would go to church, you couldn't question religion. You couldn't question any of these beliefs, any of these stories and things of that nature, and you also couldn't question behaviors as it was related to that. Because to me it didn't make any sense that, oh, we all know that the pastor is cheating on his wife, which is against the tenets of said religion, but at the same time, you're going to go against people because of their sexual orientation. That made no sense to me. So I continued on in my life, not really exploring a whole lot of myself until I became a teenager. By the time that I was a teenager, I was now at a point where I had gone through my first bout of cancer. I was dealing with the fact that I was now wanting to explore dating and things of that nature, and I realized I really did not have an interest in dating girls. I was becoming more and more attracted to guys, and my parents would want me to, well, they would really prevent me from going out anywhere, but when it really came to dating, they wanted me to do that. And then I thought back to, oh, the reason why you want me to do that is because you saw 6-year-old Brandon get an inkling that he liked guys, and you've been doing all this correcting and things of that nature, and now I'm starting to realize maybe that's exactly who I'm supposed to be. So I tell people when it comes to coming out is a process. And I had what I like to call a soft coming out and a hard coming out. The soft coming out was 6-year-old Brandon. The hard coming out was when I was 18. At the age of 18, my dad caught me on the phone with another guy. And this was someone who I was interested in, but he was heterosexual, and I knew that. And we were just on the phone. My dad had a flat tire at this point, and he couldn't get through the main line. My mom picked up on the main line and basically told him, Brenda's on the phone with another guy, that's why you can't get through. He comes home after having the tire fixed and everything, and he blows a gasket. He comes into my room, starts swearing up and down, calling me every single epithet you could possibly think of, and ends up saying, if you are gay, you're out of this family. So when he got done, I simply said the following: are you done? First off, don't assume anything about my life because you don't know anything about my life. You don't know my friends because you don't allow my friends to come around here. You have no real interest in anything that I do within school because he was blaming me being in theater, me being in speech and debate, me being in everything that wasn't revolving around throwing a pigskin across a damn field and running around a track as being the reasons for why I am who I am. And I'm like, you don't know any of those things, so you can't assume you know who I am. And then third of all, for the coup de grace, what if I am? What if I am? I'm still the same son you would have raised, I just happen to like guys. My dad, being the predictable soul that he was, took a swing at me. And I ducked, because he is predictable. And he basically said that I'm out of the family if they ever realize fully that I am who I am. My mom, who at this point in my life was the closest person in my life, that next morning, when I woke up, she was at the foot of my bed and basically said the exact same thing that he said, and she gave me all this Christian rhetoric. That, you know, it would be against God, against everything, against the family. I am out if I am who I am. So, this is my life up until this point, and then I go off to college. I go to Rice University, which is only 50 miles away from my hometown, and I go through orientation week. At the end of that orientation week is my first ever experience in a gay club. Went to Riches and figured out this was right. And had a blast. The next day, literally the next day, my mom called me. And I told her I had just had this wonderful experience of being at Rice, being on orientation week, having a lot of fun. She was calling me because I forgot my driver's license, and someone picked it up and called her and said, oh my goodness, you know, you lost your driver's license and all this other kind of stuff. What I didn't know was that they came up to the university and stole my car and found out where I had been. That Monday, the first day of my college experience, my parents emptied out my bank account and left me. to deal with Rice University as I have no money, I have no resources, I have no family. And that was my freshman year of college. It took me literally trying to figure out where to get resources, where to get and keep myself sustained during my freshman year of college, that first full year. I ended up getting a full-time job at a law firm, summer of my freshman year to support myself. By that following September of my sophomore year, so this has now been a full year of dealing with this, and this entire time, my dad, my mom are calling me evil. They're calling me all sorts of wrong things. They're punishing me for this. My mom died. And like I said, she was the closest person in my life. And what made it horrible is the fact that the person who was the closest person in my life was the person who made me feel in the last year of our relationship that she hated my guts. Needless to say, I took a 12-gauge shotgun to my closet door right after that. And I came out of the closet, fully who I am, knowing fully who I am at this point, so I am a late bloomer at this point. One of my favorite church stories happened shortly after this. I went to church on Easter Sunday when I was still going to church, and my dad, who had now been remarried at this point, had told everyone a story that I did not know about until I was at church. So at church, we're getting done with the service. Thankfully, I was like, no one's bothering me. Get done with to the end of the service, when all of a sudden during the benediction, the minister was like, I want to send a special shout out to all of our college students. I don't want to name any names, but Brother Mack. I'm like, this man gonna call me out in the middle of church, okay? Hey, what's going on? We haven't seen you in a while. Well, I've been busy with school, things of that nature. I hear you're getting married. So I had a moment, thought about it, looked around, I was like, no, I'm not getting married. It's not legal in this state yet. Some people got it, some people didn't. And so, of course, me being me, I just said, and for those of you who don't know, you'll understand by the time you get home. So that's how I came out of church. After that, it just became, I have lived a life of just dealing with how to be me. And I was tired of trying to deal with just how to be the basic sense of who I was. So I dissed church, I dissed not being comfortable in myself, and dedicated myself to, I'm gonna fully be me, and I'm gonna advocate for all of those who are like me, because we're not at the so-called table. So my main thing that I do in my life is I'm an educator. I work in college admissions and also do LGBT activism and research. And I focus specifically on intersections when it comes to race, gender, and sexuality, because all those things intermingle. And one of the things that has been the most frustrating about being an activist in this community is we don't elevate and respect the voices of people who look and come from the backgrounds like me. And it goes back to history for me, because I'm a very big history person. When we talk about Stonewall, two names that we never ever hear about, and should be the names we first hear about, are Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. These are trans women of color who started this movement. There would not be gay marriage. There would not be any of the advancements if it had not been for people of color who look like and sound like me and come from backgrounds that are not the majority, but unfortunately we don't see that. What we see is a false narrative of who we are as a community. We see the human rights campaigns of the world headed up by rich white gay men. We see the queer folk, those type of representations that devoid the voices and experiences of people of color and the trans community. When the people who have been fighting this fight for the longest, and the ones who have been hurting in our community due to silence because of our experiences, silence from the communities we've come from, silence for us not dealing with the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality, and we're not elevating even ourselves within the community. So I say all this because of a couple of things. One, it's important for people to share their stories, because that's how we come to an understanding of who we are, and that's how we get rid of the shame of ourselves. Because 49 people died in Orlando, and what's not being said is a lot. One, they were in a Latinx experience and club, a community of color space, fully being themselves, fully appreciating and embracing themselves, and someone who was dealing with the shame of themselves felt the need to rob them of life. If our society was more opening, accepting of who we are, that would not have happened. We're breeding the hate that goes into that, and we have to challenge that. That challenge starts with us uplifting and creating the environment for people to be fully who they are, 100% of who they are, at every waking moment, at every waking space, at every waking opportunity. The second thing is this. We have got to eliminate toxic masculinity in our society. As someone who does intersections of race, gender, and sexuality, I can tell you that I can honestly say that toxic masculinity led to what happened in Orlando, because we get very fragile of what it's supposed to be a man, a woman, trans, anything. Gender is a spectrum. Respect the entire spectrum. Don't correct people to say the right way to be is this, the wrong way to be is that, and religion has got to stop doing that. Because it's feeding in to that toxic masculinity, it's feeding in to the negativity that we see as the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and religion. And it's okay to question. It's my final point. It's okay to question all of society, because when we question is how we arrive to that understanding. And if we become a more understanding society, a more understanding world, we get to where tragedies like what happened in Orlando don't happen. And where people like me, who's that young 6-year-old figuring out himself, would have realized then it was okay to be you, and now at 33 years old, it's damn sure okay to be you. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm a polyamorous, pansexual, pre-op transsexual, teapot agnostic. Oh, is it? Okay. Okay. Teapot agnostic and a lapsed pastafarian. As you can see, I really love Lolita fashion also, and obviously I live in Texas, which it just seems that it's kind of everything is opposed in regards to that. I often describe myself as living in a giant redneck belt buckle of the Bible Belt. And, okay. Now, when I first started realizing that there was something different about me, I think it was probably when I was about 3, and my mom kind of freaked out a little bit, not so much because it was like a gender variance thing, but because I had started trying to shave my legs, and I had cut myself, and so she was worried, and so, it was a big thing about that, and my mom was actually pretty cool. My mom was a tomboy, and she was forced to go to Catholic school and wear skirts and do all these other things, and but from what I know of my mom, I've seen my mom wear makeup and put on a dress maybe 5 times in my life. So she kind of understood the concept of gender nonconformity, even though she, still, she was a straight woman, she identified as a woman, but she was, tomboyish. So I think she was a little bit sympathetic to that. I think the first time I really put my finger on it was I had been begging my mom to buy me Cabbage Patch doll, because I liked, dolls. Go figure. And so she actually got it for me. She got it for me, and I opened up the box, and I saw the Cabbage Patch doll. And I was like really happy about it. Then within a couple seconds after that, my friends, my brother's friends, they all started laughing at me. And they all started making fun of me. And they're like, that's for a girl. What are you doing with that? You know, that's a girl's toy. And that was also, that's when I realized that, yeah, that's what it is. I'm a girl. And I also realized that it was not accepted at the same time. And so from that point forward, I started trying to hide it for a long time. And I went through a lot of, like my teenage years, repressing, trying to be this, as you mentioned, this over-masculinized form of a male. Try to make myself become that. As you can see, I didn't succeed. Thankfully. My mom wasn't like super religious or anything. Like, she wouldn't ever really give me a straight answer about it. Like, I would ask her, like, you know, hey Mom, do you believe in God? And she was like, well, it's not really a matter of what I believe, it's a matter of what you believe. And you have to make up your own mind on these things. And I think that was probably the best thing she could have done to address the issue. Now, she did let me get exposed to it. My godmother was very, very religious. We weren't allowed to talk about Santa Claus around the other kids, around her kids, because if, you know, they had this thing where, like, if you change one letter in Santa, it becomes Satan. And like, they really believe this, right? And so I was like, okay, so I found that out the year, actually, that I figured out that Santa Claus was BS too. I was sitting on Santa's lap, and I noticed that Santa's glasses looked a lot like Pepe's, which is my grandfather. And I was like, so I looked at him, I said, Pepe! And so, like, they rushed me out of the room, and I was like, no, you're to tell everyone. So, and in some ways, like, you know, and, you know, later on I ended up getting exposed to religion because of my godmother. She wanted me to go to this Bible camp. And, well, apparently I was a heathen from the beginning. But I went to this Bible camp, and, you know, we were doing all the activities and stuff. And since we were in a young group, we had to leave early. We had to go to bed early. And, of course, you know, they put me with the boys. And so I'm in this room with 3 other boys. And I don't know how it happened, but somewhere along the way I decided, or I had convinced them that moon and sunshine people out the window would be a good idea. Needless to say, this had and this was like Northern Baptist. This isn't even like super conservative Southern Baptist. And they still teach the hellfire and all that stuff. Or they did at the time, I don't know if they still do. But so this freaked people out because this was like those little town square, and everybody is like walking in this little town square thing, and of course we're up there on the 2nd floor doing our thing. And so they send up the pastor, and the pastor comes up and he starts talking with us, and he was trying to explain to us why you shouldn't do these kinds of things and this and that. And over the course of the conversation, he figured out that I think he figured out that I was the ringleader of the situation. So I kind of got pulled off to the side, and he started talking with me. And I guess because he figured I was so good at convincing people to do things that people wouldn't normally do, he decided to put me on a path to the ministry. And so yeah, I spent the rest of the day and the next couple days, you know, I was reading the Bible and stuff like that, and until it came time to give a sermon. And so I actually gave a sermon. I was like essentially like a junior Baptist minister. Briefly, and I actually won first place award for it. I mean, talk about a major amount of confirmation that you're getting from a whole group of people that are all like, yeah, you know, and like the sermon was about like rock and roll or something. It was like, you know, how the rhythmic beats cause you to become such. It was silliness, but looking back. But, you know, I was under the guidance of the pastor at the time, so he was kind of directing me. He was helping me learn this. And the other weird thing that happened is when I went to go and get my award, it was only the one of 2 times in my life that this happened, but suddenly blood started spurting out of my nose. It was just a random nosebleed. I think it was because the air was dry or something like that. So I went to go up there, and so now I have all these people just looking at me like, what's going on with this person? Why are they, is this like some kind of sign from God? So like I had that kind of look going on at the same time, and I also had other people that were, you know, a little more progressive, like, no, it's nothing like that. So, yeah, that was kind of my, well, actually, technically, I guess that was my second experience with the religion, because my first time, apparently, I was baptized when I was a baby Catholic. I've actually been baptized 3 times in my life, and apparently it didn't work. I'm not sure exactly what's going on about that. And, well, it took me a while to come out. I didn't come out until I was 17. And the first time when I came out, it was actually not on purpose. My brother was staying with us, which turns out my brother is not very accepting, but I'll get to that later. He was like, you know, this is the way he put it. He says, you know, I'm a good-looking guy, and I'm not into guys, but you're good-looking too. Why don't you have girls calling you? Are you gay? And I was like, well, actually, I didn't know what pansexual was at the time, so I was like, well, actually, no, I'm bi. He's like, oh, well, that's fine. I don't care if you're gay, as long as you don't think you're a girl. So, yeah, I came out in steps. I had pushed, at that point, I was like, I didn't know how things were going to go. It's like, you know, my mom seemed like she was pretty cool, but like I didn't really know my dad, and my mom I love my mom a lot. We were always very close. And I didn't think she would reject me, and it turns out she didn't. But I couldn't take that risk. You know what I mean? I didn't know for 100% sure that she wasn't going to reject me. And I think that says something about our society. That a child has to grow up wondering if they're going to be rejected by their own parents. I think this is the power that religion has over society, is that it is so insidious that it can make parents reject their own children. There's not many things that can do this. You know, and it's really sad when you see it, when people do get rejected, and it's just wrong. Okay. Okay, well, I'm getting, it sounds like that we're going to have to wrap up here a little bit, but one of the underlying issues, I think, with religion that causes a lot of the ills is this unnecessary conformity that we have. And I think if we went around and we gave this microphone to everyone in here, you could think of an instance where you have been treated badly because you didn't conform, whether it was because you weren't black enough, or you weren't trans enough, or you weren't straight enough, or, you know, you ate shrimp. There are all these different reasons that people end up getting persecuted are generally due to unnecessary conformity, which I think is the underlying thing that separates, because sometimes people can have religious views and they're relatively benign. But if you notice, their emphasis on conformity is minimal. Whereas if you go on to the more harmful ones, even you know, the fundamentalists, they have a very rigid set of conformity. And even regimes that did their things without religion, for instance, under Stalin and Mao, you had this emphasis on unnecessary conformity, whether it was conformance to a political ideology or any number of other things. It comes down to conformity. And I think it becomes very difficult to address the religious issue because people get so offended so quickly. So I think maybe one of the other ways that we could address this issue is by addressing the issue of conformity, which essentially sidesteps the religious issue, but addresses it at the same time. But that's what I had to say on it. So, in regards to the bathroom bill, I do have to go, so I'm very glad to be in a place where I don't have to worry about getting in trouble for which bathroom I go to.
We have time for some questions. Right, Vic? Vic, we still have time for some questions.
We gotta wrap it up.
Oh, we gotta wrap it up. Well, folks, Thank you for going on a journey with me. See what happens when you sit down, start talking to the people next to you? Right. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot to learn all your life. And if you by chance are a member of our group, you're going to find all different kinds of speakers who come and talk about all different kinds of things. And the more you learn, the more you know. So I want to thank our panelists. Let's give them a hand. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. We'll do it again.